Welcome back to Linked by Golf, the podcast exploring the journeys of people linked by the game. I'm your host, Ross McGuire, and today's episode is a fascinating one because we're going behind the scenes of something every golfer uses, but very few truly understand. I'm at Srixon's European custom build facility, sitting down with their product manager, Joe Miller, and in this conversation we dive into the history of golf clubs, how modern equipment is actually built, and some of the biggest misconceptions golfers have when it comes to what's in their bag. If you've ever wondered whether your clubs are right for you, or what really matters when it comes to performance, this episode will definitely make you think differently. Let's go over to Joe. Joe Miller, Srixon Product Manager. Thanks for your time again.
No problem.
We've talked already, Joe, about the facility here at Ashvale, but I'd love to go through some of the history of golf in relation to Srixon and just get your perspective on some of the information from Srixon itself. So where does the story of a golf club really begin?
That's a good one, Ross. And I know you're Scottish, so you might be a little bit biased on this, and I don't blame you because I think with regards to making golf clubs, it was the sort of home. I think there's evidence, and it's debated, that the first pebble was struck with a stick around the 12 and 1300s. But there's evidence of crafted golf clubs, mid 1500s. And they were sort of crafted out of wood. And it was quite, when you go back, and I've looked at it a little bit, and you might have to check this one, but I think it was King James II who said, "No more golf because you're not practicing your archery."
That's right.
Yeah. And a lot of those guys who made the bows, they actually became craftsmen making golf clubs because they were good at making bows. So they were generally, I think they generally used hardwoods because obviously softwoods wouldn't work. Beech, ash, and there was obviously some fruit trees in there, pears, apple, and then later we see persimmon. And I don't think most people realise that's a fruit as well. I do believe so. Yeah, those
Didn't know that.
hardwoods.
There you
Yeah,
go.
I think so. Yeah, I could be wrong. We'll probably get 5,000 people telling me Mr.
Got it
Miller
wrong.
doesn't know his trees.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, I think we can put it down to Scotland, sort of mid 1500s, really, that we sort of saw the first ones. Yeah.
And then what part of that journey do you think golfers really think about in terms of the history of the clubs and where it came from?
Oh, it's a great question, isn't it? I think the big changes, the big transitions, was it about 1920, something like that? Was it steel shafts and, carbon shafts, graphite shafts? Um, I mean, for me, I love the science of it. And getting back just before the Industrial Revolution, we sort of saw the first iron about, I think they were about 1720, something like that. But when they were using certain types of metals, and I think it was a guy, if I remember rightly, Abraham Darby, with his smelting processes using coke, he could get low sulfur iron, which was less brittle. So all these things happen. And, in Shropshire, we saw Thomas Telford with the bridges and all these things. So, golf metals which have often been used in other industries. So until there was advancements there, we couldn't advance with golf. So it's changed radically, but there's been some huge steps along the way. Titanium was massive, wasn't it? Making
Yeah,
those
absolutely.
first big headed drives. In fact, Cleveland was the first company to make a 460cc driver.
Was that the launcher?
Yeah, they made a
There you go.
460cc driver. Yeah, first company to do that. So
Fantastic.
yeah, there's a claim to fame there.
And what is it about those, I guess, evolutions in golf and the manufacture and creation that, influences how a club actually feels in the golfer's hands?
It's a good question. To me, it's the head weights haven't changed massively and the grip weights. The shafts have, but the sort of balance and the feel of a golf club, um, it hasn't changed radically. But you have to have head weights, grip weights, and shaft weights, precision to make it sort of feel good and how it feels in the hands. That you don't need too big a change before it feels odd, doesn't feel right. And that's where custom clubs come in. And, when you go, off piste with radically different lengths and things, you can see some changes.
Yeah, and we touched on this earlier, Joe, but what stage do you see that a club is actually real to you?
Or when the grip goes on, definitely. Yeah. And there's no doubt about it. When the grip goes on, suddenly it's in your hands. It's the appropriate diameter. The swing weight's correct. You can sort of feel it. You can swish it. Yeah. Until the grip goes on. Yeah. It feels, it's alien to you. The grip needs to go on.
And what does quality mean in this building?
Oh, everything, everything. It's a Japanese company. Um, we are duty bound. That's our job. We are duty bound to give a service and a product to the consumer who's, you know, hard earned money, whatever profession they are, you know, healthcare worker, gardener, whatever. They worked hard to get that money. And this is their disposable income. And it's our duty, as a Japanese company, they demand that we give a quality product. Um, that's first and foremost above everything else.
And where does that attention to detail matter the most?
That's a great question. For most people, I would suggest when they look at a golf club, they look at the sort of cosmetic and the finish of the head, the ferrule, and then obviously the grip where you touch the club. Because if it's scrambled or it just, it's not on correctly, it's very visible. But to me, from our processes, the actual cut length is the most important. If we
Right.
get that wrong, so many other things are wrong. The length's wrong, the lie's wrong, the swing weight's wrong. So if we make a mistake and it's not picked up, the cutting of the shaft is absolutely critical. And how far we put it into the head, the ferrule depth. So we need those things to be precise. But I get it that people see the other things. They see a small scratch or they see they might see a slight decal misalignment. It's not going to change the actual physical capabilities or, what how the club works. But if you cut that shaft wrong, you got to go backwards. You got to start again.
Yeah, absolutely. And then on that point, what kind of skills do people need to be able to put the clubs together at that type of level that you're talking about, Joe?
God, that's a good one, isn't it? I mean, people would always sort of say hand, eye, and dexterity. But to me, you can learn those skills reasonably quickly, especially with repetition. To me, it's a trait. You've got to care. You've got to put it if it goes on the swing weight scale and you need to walk 100 yards back into the warehouse to pick a head weight -2 to align the swing weight, that's what you've got to do. You've got to care. It's not a skill to me, it's a passion. And that's maybe a little bit overused, but there's people who have a passion for golf who work in our workshop, as they do in all golf industry. But there's other people who do it for a wage, but still to care. That means probably more than anything because golf clubs aren't cheap anymore. They need to be right and you need to be bothered. If you've put a grip on incorrectly, you need to take it back off. I was showing you how we laid up tape earlier. If there's a seam or a wrinkle in the tape, just take it off.
You did that in about 20 seconds with
Yeah,
4 layers of tape.
I've done it before.
I noticed.
But it's those sort of things that if you're layering up a grip and the first one goes on with the wrinkle, it's a snowball effect. It multiplies, and
Yeah.
suddenly you've got a ridge underneath the grip running in the wrong direction. Just take it off. Just start again. Care about what you're doing. So yes, skills maybe or traits. To me, it's do you care?
And how do you know the build is right when you get to the end?
QC effectively has a number of procedures and processes, length, lie, loft, swing weight, and we have to be within a very tight tolerance from our Japanese spec sheet. So yeah, we're very particular about that.
And how do you think golfers feel about changes in equipment?
Changes. That's a great question. When you mean changes, you sort of say like when they change their spec or like the materials change. What do you think?
I guess it could be either, yeah, like the look, the feel, what's the kind of things that you bump up against with customers
I, I,
ultimately?
I think for me, it's the unwillingness to move off the sort of norm, the tradition. Golfers just want it to look a driver has to look like a sort of pear shape or
Yeah,
an
that's
iron
true,
profile
yeah.
has to look like this. And that puts demands and constraints on R&D and
We're almost conditioned, aren't we, as
yeah,
golfers?
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, and I get it. I understand it. We do like things what look nice, but um, no, there's times they'll go with it, and marketing can drive it. But we often see things coming around full circle, don't we? Golf ball, visual tech and stuff, and it always ends up back at a white ball and,
Yeah.
head designs that come back to a
If
traditional.
you go to the Golf Museum in St Andrews, you can see what are effectively hybrids from
Yes.
200 years ago.
Yes, exactly. And they knew what they were doing. They just didn't have the materials to do it.
Yeah.
The one at St Andrews there, just off the old course, is phenomenal, isn't
It's
it?
unbelievable,
Yeah,
yeah.
it is. And those guys knew what they were doing. And you even see things like convex and concave faces and all
That's
this.
right,
You know,
yeah.
it's quite incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess just on that theme, what things have stayed pretty consistent in golf even though the rest of it evolves?
Well, head weights. That's the one for me. We
I'm
touched
just
on it. Yeah.
fascinated by that, yeah.
Yeah. Head weights, especially like, drivers, even though they've gone in volume much bigger, the actual weight hasn't changed a lot. Titanium face plates are quite heavy because they're forged and the bodies are lighter. They tend to be a cast titanium, maybe an 811 titanium. But they haven't changed a great deal. We've messed with that. Everybody has trying to sort of find the holy grail. But head weights haven't changed a lot. Shaft weights have changed radically,
Yeah,
and grip weights a little bit. But remember, if you've got a head weight, you've got to balance it at the other end. So if you go light grip weight, you're going to have a heavy swing weight if the head weight stays consistent. So yeah, there's challenges there. For me, shaft weight has changed and shaft manufacturing. I think, they started off when we were talking about earlier, the 1500s, I think started with hazel before they ever went to hickory.
yeah.
So we've seen an evolution from, natural products into sort of man-made products into now composites. So yeah, we've seen a lot of change there.
And then how do you decide when something is truly better versus just different? How do you know?
Gosh, that's a tough one. Mm. I think when you make a radical change, whether it be a square, triangle driver or a hybrid type iron, generally speaking, you can see some gains, some advantages, but does it overcome what people want to see? That's the challenge. Um, so the challenge is to be able, like I said, I think I touched on this earlier, to make something what looks acceptable. Because there's points in time in the golf industry where there is definite changes. Titanium was a big one. Its strength to weight ratio is phenomenal. Its ability to rebound, these sort of things, and we touched on carbon and graphite shafts. Um, and there's some definite advantages. Now, I think if there's a big leap, people will take it. If it's a small leap, but it means a difference in how it looks, I'm not so sure there's a willingness to do that.
Yeah. And then what do golfers misunderstand about choosing equipment? What things do you think?
Oh, specs, definitely.
Right.
No doubt. I'm a standard spec is I've heard that so many times, and I don't think there's a realization that even within brands, let alone across the industry, that a standard spec from one product range is different to another. So if you get a smaller profile, um, iron micro cavity, you can almost guarantee the lie will be a little flatter than the bigger headed, you know, perimeter weighted club. There's a consideration given to that type of golfer and where he's going to hit it. So if you said to me, my wedge, I want to set a wedges, Joe, and the lie is standard, to me, it could be 63.5, it could be 64.5. And then you say I'm standard length. And I'm like, well, this brand is this length and this brand is this length.
Exactly.
So yeah, unless you tell me your iron is 37.25, and by the way, you need to tell me exactly which ruler you're measuring it on. It means nothing to me. Yeah. So, when someone marches in and says I'm standard, I'm like, there is no standard. It's like someone saying in Marks and Spencer's, I need a standard pair of trousers.
What does that mean?
What's one of them? And even the sizes of the trousers, they vary, don't they?
Yeah,
So
of course.
there is no standard.
If you've been enjoying the show, please do remember to follow on your favourite podcast platform and share it with a friend. Now let's get back to the pod.
So when people find the right setup, what actually changes for them?
If they get it right, I think there's a time, and it comes to all of us as golfers. If you get it right, it really does make a difference. Even at a dress, you're comfortable on you before you even hit the club. You put your hands on it, you address it. If the length and lie is right, um, before you even start, you're in the right place, your mindset. And if you have early success with a golf club, how psychologically that, you really, there's a lot of psychology, isn't there? The best shots are hit in nets, the second best shots are hit on a range, the third best shots are hit on a golf course. So confidence is huge. But then when you go to swing your golf club, um, when things are right, to be able to have that centered hit with a square face. I mean, the face angle is king. The bullet starts off where the gun aims it. So,
Absolutely.
if you can get things right, and launch monitor data is fabulous. I'm a big fan of it. But remember, there's an algorithm, and remember, it's still physics. So from Galileo to Newton to Einstein to Hawking, we're still guessing a little bit. But what we do know is those quantifiable things like lengths, lies, head weights. So if people really want to get into golf, they would learn that spec and they would learn what they need instead of getting wrapped up in the 7 iron spinning at 6,100. There's still an element of sort of guessing going on here. But with specs, it's quantifiable. This is the mass, this is the length, this is the material. Learn it, understand it, and know what your specs are. Because you can go to a range and you can go on launch monitor data, and one day you're hitting a one-piece range ball, with a bit of mud on. The next day you're hitting a two-piece with some water on. All these things change. Yeah, everything changes. So unless you can quantify it, it's difficult with launch monitor data. It's a brilliant product, but like I say, we've forgotten the basics a little bit, I think, sometimes. And to me, when you've been in our workshop, that's where it starts. Know your specs, understand it. When you get there, there's no reason to not know what you think you should be, or roughly. And don't be afraid to ask those questions.
Absolutely. And what can everyday golfers learn from how elite players approach equipment?
So this might surprise people. First of all, most of them don't care what it looks like. You get a tour player, sometimes it looks like it's been dragged behind the car. They want it to work. For them, it's a toolkit. So I'll give you an example. Me and you we're going to do some DIY at home, yeah?
Yep.
And we buy a set of matching standing tools, don't we? And the box is the same, it's yellow and black, and we've
Yeah.
got the same saw and the same blade, and it's got to look right. And then the guy who can make the cupboard properly, we have to get him in, don't we? Because we've made a really poor job of putting that IKEA cupboard together. Or we've tried to make a desk for the daughter or something. So we have to call in a craftsman, and he walks in, and they look like they fell out the back of the lorry, don't they? He's got different saws. They're all worn out. They're tools, aren't they? They are to do a job. And when you look at elite players and some tour players, there's old clubs in the bag. A scratch to the top of the crown, it just doesn't bother them. There's lead tape smeared on it. It's a tool to work. In retail and consumers, if there's a speck of rust comes on occasionally, it'll be returned, and we sort of have that scenario whereby it's not affecting the club in any way. Whereas elite golfers, it doesn't matter. Their job, whether it be an elite amateur, is to shoot the lowest score, or a professional to earn as much money and to win those tournaments. So to them, it's a toolkit. To most amateurs, it's as much a prized possession, and they want it to look nice. Whereas I think elite golfers, no, it's got to work, and you see that a lot. And don't get me wrong, there's some elite amateurs who will clean their clubs, be obsessional about it. But for me, from amateurs to top pros, it's more like they know their specs and it's got to work. And if it's an old 3 wood what works, or an old putter, it stays in the back. If they want the old generation ball, they use that. They don't have to go to the new and the newest generation of product.
Brilliant. And then how much influence do tour players have on what ends up in regular golfers' bags, do you think?
Oh, there's no doubt there's a huge influence in there. I don't think companies would pay multi-millions to players if they didn't think it had an influence. There is a pyramid of influence. Um, as a company, I think you can see, our tour staff isn't as big as some others. But from a retailer and a consumer point of view, we realize that retailers have to make a living, and consumers, there's a sort of a range, a price range where clubs, go out of range. And by not having such a huge tour staff and a huge marketing budget, we are able to offer very competitively priced products. We don't have to pay 50 million to this player and this player. And yet, proportionally, if you actually look at the amount of tour wins we have, like most weeks on PG Tour, if the field's say 140 plus golfers, we might only have 10 staffers, and yet our proportion of wins is much higher than that. So we punch really well from a tour point of view, and a lot of those players, you can imagine, it's a Japanese company, they've been with us for many, many years. Not a lot of chopping and changing there.
Yeah, absolutely. And then what's a memorable moment where equipment really mattered for one of those players? Have you got any memories that really stand out?
Oh, absolutely. The one that stands out for me, you're not going to believe this. Let me guess. I think it was 1995, Shinnecock Hills. This is a guy using a club, which we talked about tour players using something what works, was a Cleveland staff player, Corey Pavin, hitting his forward
That's right.
at Shinnecock
Of
Hills to
course,
the
yeah.
last. It was a VAS forward. And did you see the irons? Do you remember the
Is that the
irons?
ones with the kind of
Yeah,
frothy heel on them?
yeah. The anti-shank they used to put
Yeah.
on. Yeah. And they had a vibration system on, which was developed by, I think, Rossignol, the ski people. And there's a guy who used a product that worked. You know, he got a little bit more loft on it. I think it was, a 16-degree forward, 16 and a half. And his caddy had a discussion with him. I think it was 225 pins, something like 9 or 10 front. And they were discussing 2 iron and this forward, because there wouldn't be a huge difference in the two, because the 2 iron would be quite strong in loft. And they went with that forward, and there was a golfer using a club that worked. And years ago, you wouldn't have had that type of head where the mass was and being able to get it in the air. And, he was, what was he, 5'9", 104, he wasn't a big man. And he'd only hit it 230 off the tee, and he had
Yeah.
another 225 to go.
Yeah, that was incredible.
And then I
Excellent.
think Greg Norman was behind you, chasing him down.
That's right.
And to me, he hit that little drawing with that forward, and I was like, wow. And probably you won't see that so much anymore because, you know, unlike boxing, we don't have weight divisions. But you look at the guys now, they hit it so far. They are such big units. So
Yeah.
maybe that we won't see those shots quite so much. Him and the sort of Zach Johnsons and the Jeff Slumans anymore. But there was a guy who used something that didn't look necessarily perfect, but it worked.
Yeah, it was definitely different, that one.
Yeah.
And then behind the scenes here, Joe, who are the people that golfers never get to see behind the brand?
In this building, um, I think the admin side of things, the demand planning, those orders are put in. Oh, we're about to launch a product in the upcoming months, and that's all done and dusted. We're moving on to the next lot now. So what you see when it comes out, we're on the next one 2 years down the line. So we've a team of demand planners who works with all different vendors from all over the world, bringing those components in here. So they're really big. Then we have the custom services team who deal with the retailers, consumers. So all of those sort of people behind the scenes, often golf, you just want to see that sprinkling of gold dust, don't you? The tour truck and you know what I mean? The
Yeah.
interesting bit. But there is no products without the teams behind. And then the workshop team, every day they come in, and, build golf clubs every single day.
And it's hundreds.
Yeah, it is hundreds and hundreds. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a lot of golf clubs. Most of those guys, the skilled ones will pop out over 100 clubs a day per man.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And then what draws those people into working in golf equipment, do you think? What do you see?
Um, well, it's someone like me who have failed golfers, because we all wanted to play on tour, didn't we? And then we had to find a different route.
I think you did okay. You're talking about playing for your county against Gary Wilson. Home, you couldn't have been that bad.
Um, the I think there's a passion with some people, and there's no doubt about it. It's their life, isn't it? It's a bit of a Bill Shankly when he said, it's a matter of life and death. It's more important than that football. And it's a bit like that with golf. That some people, it's everything to them. They live and breathe it. And some people, then you get, I think, people like me who like the science side of things as well. So the sport and the science sort of come together. Why does it do that? There's a lot more to it than people think, the metals, the composites, the putting it together. So we get all sort of walks of life, I think. But generally speaking, a lot of people who work in this industry, especially in sales and workshop, they tend to be interested in golf and play the game. Most of our team play the game.
Absolutely. And then just wrapping up here, Joe, what's something about this facility that would surprise the listeners?
Mm. I think probably the workshop. I think the workshop and the nature of the tools. There you go. There's a good one. So I showed you the cutting rooms, and that's quite a sophisticated piece of equipment, very accurate, can cut multiple shafts like a set of irons. But then we have the ferrule press, where we press the ferrules on, but you can do that by hand. But then after that, very much it's all hands on.
Yeah.
So, most people could build golf clubs in their garage with sort of quite, simple tools. And that process is very hands on all the way through. That I think people would be surprised at the lack of, sort of robotics. Everything is still hands. And when you sort of talk about handcrafted and things, there's always a worry, isn't there? And there always will be when you have the human element. It's a Friday afternoon, you sort of want to go, oh, you're worried about the mortgage payment, or, you've had a row with the girlfriend. There's always those things going through your head. So keeping that human element and having those processes in place, because you physically have to put a grip on.
Yeah.
You do have to put a tip weight in. So as you saw, there isn't these high-tech machines in there. I think people think that it starts off like Wallace and Gromit and it gets to the other end. It just doesn't work like that. So, yeah, a lot of people hands-on, with a lot of attention to detail from the start process to the end. But there's not like, lights and gadgets, and it's a very sort of simple, basic tool workshop, and that's what a lot of them are, because the actual putting the components together is unlike the actual making of the components. There's more automated processes to make the heads than there is when you put it all together. And all our custom clubs are built here for the whole of Europe. So everything from here goes all over Europe. So yeah, we build it and send it out. So, we put those parts together. And to me, once you've got quality components, then it's about how it's put together. It really is. So yeah, I think that would surprise a lot of people. They would expect to go in there and there'd be one person pushing buttons, but that's not the case, is it?
Definitely not. It was absolutely blown me away. But Joe, thanks so much for taking
You're
me through
welcome. It was an
everything.
absolute pleasure.
Thanks for the tour around the facility. It's been absolutely fascinating getting time with you. Thanks so much.
No problem.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank Joe Miller and the team at Srixon for their time and support to create this episode. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to follow or subscribe wherever you're listening, and if you know someone who's going through a fitting or thinking about new clubs, do send this their way. You can also find the show on Instagram at LinkByGolf2024 for future episodes, clips and insights. I'm Ross McGuire, thanks for listening.
Lomond Golf Tours have helped thousands of guests build bespoke golf trips to create a magical experience. Travel in style with our executive chauffeur travel, whether it's golf on a major championship venue or one of our hidden gems, 5-star accommodation or a boutique bed and breakfast, or is it whiskey tasting on a private boat? Lomond Golf Tours are here to help build the tour of a lifetime. Whether you're celebrating a special occasion or ticking it off your bucket list, embark on a trip that you'll remember forever. Visit www.lomondgolftours.com.